Good evening. I'm Ben Ogles, Dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences, and it's my pleasure to welcome you out to the 8th Annual Marjorie P. Hinckley Lecture here in the Hinckley Center. It's very fitting. We're pleased to have here this evening President Cecil O. Samuelson, the President of BYU, along with our Academic Vice President, Brent Webb, and his wife, Amy, and our Associate Academic Vice President, Craig Hart. We're pleased that two of President and Sister Hinckley's 5 children and their spouses are here this evening, along with 3 of Sister Hinckley's siblings have joined us as well. We extend a warm welcome to their family and to our faculty and students and the rest of the community that are here tonight. We express appreciation to the Hinckley Advisory Committee, Jane Dudley, John Hoffman, Gordon Lim, Ginny Roby, Rick Miller, Diane Spangler, and Tina Dykes for their ongoing work in overseeing the resources provided by the chair. And much of tonight's event was organized by Kim Reed, Patricia Wilson, and Robin Shumway in the Dean's Office. We express thanks to them, as well as to Charlene Clark and Lisa Willie of the School of Social Work for their help during directing students from the School of Social Work and our Student College Council who provided the ushering. Please join me in expressing thanks to these individuals for their work. Thank you. The college produced a DVD about the Marjorie P. Hinckley Chair to be shared with visitors who come to BYU in the auspices of the chair. Our purpose in creating the DVD was to be able to acquaint future generations and those who are funded by the chair with the warmth, faith, and character of this wonderful woman. We will now show a portion of that special tribute. Following the movie, Gordon Lim, the director of the School of Social Work, will introduce tonight's lecturer, Dr. David Hawkins.
Well, as you can see, that this endowment was very aptly named after Sister Hinckley. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. David Hawkins. We had him here last year, and was just very impressed not only with his academic expertise that you'll get to hear, but also what a great person he is. And for in the School of Social Work, this is our first opportunity to have somebody from a School of Social Work to present here, so no pressure on you, Dr. Hawkins. Dr. David Hawkins is the Endowed Professor of Prevention and Funding and founding director of the Social Development Research Group in the School of Social Work at the University of Washington in Seattle. He received his BA from Stanford and his PhD in sociology from Northwestern University. His research focuses on understanding and preventing child and adolescent health and behavior problems. He seeks to identify risk and protective factors for health and behavior problems across multiple domains. To understand how these factors interact in the development of healthy behavior and the prevention of problem behaviors. He develops and tests prevention strategies which seek to reduce risk through the enhancement of strengths and protective factors in families, schools, and communities. He is the principal investigator of the Community Youth Development Study, a randomized field experiment involving 24 communities across 7 states, testing the effectiveness of the Communities That Care prevention system, developed by Dr. Hawkins and Richard F. Catalano. He has authored numerous articles and several books, as well as prevention programs for parents and families, including Guiding Good Choices, Parents Who Care, and Supporting School Success. His prevention work is guided by the social development model, his theory of human behavior. Dr. Hawkins is a current member of the Institute of Medicine's Board on Children, Youth, and Families, and a past president of the Society for Prevention Research. He is committed to translating research into effective practice and policy to improve adolescent health and development. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Gordon. Is this working? Can you hear me in the back? Good. I want to, well, I guess not. I guess we're going to use this one. I want to thank you for that introduction. Those of you who know me know my father-in-law was an Irish immigrant to this country, and were he here, he would have introduced me differently. What he would have said to you is, I'd like you to meet my son-in-law, Dave. He's a doctor, but it's not the kind does you any good. I want to begin by noting that my quest to understand what promotes healthy child development began at home. My wife, Maureen, and I have been working on our marriage for 42 years. We're still working on it. And it's a joy to be able to show you who is my partner in life. We have two children, Quinn, who is now 31, and Nora, who was born 26 years ago today on February 9th. It's Nora's birthday. If she were a little closer, she's in Washington, D.C. We can't sing happy birthday and let her hear it, so we'll have to pass. Maureen and I want those kids, and always wanted those kids, to be productive members of their communities who contributed to society and to the economy, who had strong families and friendships, and who lived lives free from substance abuse and crime. I think it's what all parents want for their children. And it's really an honor and a privilege today to talk to you in the context of the Marjorie Hinckley Endowed Lecture about the progress that's been made in research in the last 3 decades towards understanding how we all can promote the healthy development of young people. I wasn't always a university professor. Before that, I was a probation officer working with delinquent kids. When I say before that, I'm reminded of a trip Maureen and I took in 1976 to visit her Irish cousins for the first time. We'd never met them. They didn't have telephones yet in those days, and they weren't sure what day we'd arrive, but they knew we'd be there one day. And we knocked on the door, and Mrs. Mahan, this was in County Roscommon, Mrs. Mahan threw open the door and she said, "We're so glad you've come home. Come in." And she welcomed us with open arms, and soon the cousins were around and the uncles and the fiddles were out and the mandolins were out and music was being played and food was on the table. And at some point Maureen said, "Now, isn't there an Uncle Jack?" And Mrs. Mann says, "Oh, your Uncle Jack, he's gone to town in the donkey cart. You go up on the road, you'll see him soon enough, sure enough." And so we did. We went up on the road, and sure enough, there was an elderly man being pulled along by a little donkey on a cart. And Maureen starts up to him, and she says, "Hello." He says, "You're Kathleen's daughter." And she said, "That's right." And he says, "And who are you?" And I said, "I'm David Hawkins. I'm Maureen's husband." He says, "And where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from America, from the United States. You can tell by my accent." And he says, "Before that." And I explained to him how my family came from Missouri, and then before that from Virginia, and every time I'd stop, he'd say, "Before that." So finally said to him, "Well, Uncle Jack, as far as I know, Hawkins is an English name from County Cornwall in the south of England." Uncle Jack Mahan never spoke to me again. God rest his soul, this is a true story, he's gone from this earth, but he never had another word for me. And I tell you that story because it reminds me how easy it is to fail to communicate across cultural boundaries that sometimes separate us, even when you're members of the same family. I'm here tonight because I'm committed to the healthy development of all children, regardless of where they came from before that. I'll save you the stories of my life as a delinquency probation officer, except to tell you that at some point I began to feel like I was running an ambulance service at the bottom of a cliff. We could help young people move in a positive direction, but the next day the judge will have referred 2 or 3 more children to us, and we were always behind the curve. And I became interested in the idea of prevention. I said, shouldn't someone have done something to help these young people before they came to the place where they just really only like to smoke marijuana and rip people off? And I became really interested in the concept of prevention. And when I got to the University of Washington, I began to have the opportunity to look about what do we know in the late 1970s about preventing delinquency. There had been at that time 9 true experimental studies trying to prevent delinquency in America. None of them had been effective in preventing delinquency. Not a single experiment trying to prevent delinquency had worked by 1980. It was a daunting task then to begin to think about how could we approach the prevention of delinquent behavior in this country. And in the last 30 years, there have been 2 major breakthroughs in our work that have allowed many people to develop now successful delinquency, substance abuse, teen pregnancy, school dropout prevention programs. The basic premise of these advances is a simple premise from public health, and that is if you want to prevent a problem before it happens, you need to identify the risk factors for that problem and reduce those risk factors, or identify protective factors and increase them. Today, if we were talking this evening about the prevention of cardiovascular disease, heart and lung disease, and I were to ask you what are risk factors for heart and lung disease, what would you say? Yell it out. Smoking's one, obesity's another, sedentary lifestyle, and we've had a change in American culture, in American lifestyle, because of an understanding that these risk factors contribute to cardiovascular disease. Today in America, if you don't exercise, at least you feel guilty. We know we're supposed to do that. And that sea change in lifestyle has actually caused a 40% reduction or more in cardiovascular disease in the last 30 or 40 years in this country. The same kinds of advances have now taken place in the prevention of adolescent health and behavior problems. Two important advances. First, longitudinal studies have identified factors that, when present earlier in development, predict positive or negative outcomes, and prevention researchers have developed preventive interventions and subjected them to randomized and other well-controlled trials that have shown that we actually now have a menu of test and effective preventive interventions. The advances in prediction have been the identification of risk factors that promote or that predict adolescent problem behaviors, as well as the identification of protective factors that, when present, buffer children from the development of problem behaviors, even in the face of risk. Some of these risk factors exist within communities or neighborhoods where children grow up. What you're looking at here is a chart that shows risk factors that have been shown in 2 or more high-quality studies to predict the outcomes that are in the columns. And you can see that some of these risk factors are predictors of multiple outcomes. And that's very important. We'll come back to that later. So neighborhoods can have an effect in increasing substance abuse and delinquency of young people. If you don't see a check at the intersection of a row and a column, it doesn't mean it's definitively not a risk factor, but it means at this point we don't have enough evidence to say if you could change this risk factor, you might well prevent delinquency or the other problem behaviors listed in the columns. There are also risk factors that exist within families and their interactions, within school settings, as well as within individuals. And although we began our work in trying to identify risk factors for delinquency and substance abuse, as we continued our work, we began to learn that those risk factors were also predicting school dropout, unwanted teen pregnancies, violent behavior, and even the internalizing problems, in some cases, of depression and anxiety. So we now know targets for preventive intervention, and we also know things that need to be strengthened if we want to enhance protective factors. Some of these protective factors are characteristics of individuals. Children born with a resilient temperament are actually protected by that bounce-back temperament. My children, Quinn and Nora, as far as I know, peas from the same pod. But Quinn has a resilient temperament. I yell at Quinn, he'll say, let's go shoot baskets after a few minutes. Nora, if I were to speak to her as loudly as I am talking to you right now, when she was a young girl, she would go into her room and say, Dad's yelling at me, he's mad at me. She didn't have a resilient temperament. By the luck of birth, some people have that protective factor and others don't. The third protective factor here, competencies and skills. We know we can teach to young people the skills for social initiation, the skills for social interaction, the skills to control your impulses, the skills to do math and science and reading, etc. And those are important individual protective factors, but they're also protective factors in the social environment of young people, in the family, in the school, among neighbors and people in the community. That is, if they provide opportunities, if they recognize young people, if they establish a bond with those young people and promote healthy, clear standards for behavior, those actually serve as protective factors. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. So what people have said who've begun to read this research and understand it is we should try to reduce and change risk factors and increase protective factors in order to prevent health and behavior problems of young people. And in fact, there have now been multiple studies in which people have done just that, tried to reduce risk factors and enhance protective factors, and in fact have shown positive effects on substance abuse, delinquency, teen pregnancy, and multiple outcomes. And today in America, we now know that you can prevent these kinds of problems through well-designed preventive interventions that reduce risk and enhance protection. There are programs in each one of the areas that you're seeing here that have been tested and shown to be effective. Programs and policies that are actually known to work for preventing substance abuse and delinquency among young people. There are also programs that we now know don't work. And some of them sounded like very good ideas. Like, let's take young delinquents who haven't committed very big delinquent acts and let's send them to a prison and let the people who are lifers in that prison tell them how awful it is to be in prison. Well, people have done controlled studies of the Scared Straight program, and it's been shown to actually have iatrogenic effects. That means it makes kids more likely to commit delinquent acts after they go hear the lifers than if they were left alone and not involved in that program at all. Doctors who do you good have an adage. They say, above all, do no harm. And yet some of the things that we do in America, and I would submit that in our schools right here in Utah, some of these things may be done in the name of crime prevention, delinquency prevention, etc. And yet we know that they don't work. We need to do things that are tested and effective. I want to give you an example from our own work of a prevention program that we developed. It's called the Raising Healthy Children program, and it seeks to promote bonding and strengthen bonding to family, to promote bonding to school, and strengthening bonding to family by increasing young people's opportunities, skills, and recognition for pro-social involvement at school and at home. It's based on a theory of human behavior that we call the social development model. The people in the sociology department will probably recognize some of these theories, as will the psychologists and people in the School of Social Work here. I want to just take a moment and tell you that this theory is a really simple theory. In fact, a friend of mine once said, all you've done, Dave, is organize common sense. 5 fingers on one hand. The first thing that we think is important, obviously, is healthy behavior. That's the goal. So what does it take to promote the healthy behavior of young people? If you remember nothing else from my presentation tonight, I hope you remember these 5 things. The first thing is opportunities for active involvement in an appropriate participatory role. That is, when a mom picks up an infant, that's an opportunity for active involvement. If that mom leaves the baby in the playpen or in the layette, that's not an active involvement opportunity. If in the 1st grade sometimes I get to feed the gerbils, that's an opportunity for active involvement. If my teacher sometimes calls on me in class when I'm in 4th grade and asks me what 9 times 6 is, that's an opportunity for active involvement. If in my neighborhood, when I'm a middle schooler, they ask me, what do you think we should have on the playground, this new playground we're developing in the community, that's an opportunity for active involvement. The second thing is skills for successful participation. If I have the chance to feed the gerbils in the 1st grade, but my teacher didn't teach me that I have to both water and feed the gerbils, and I've got that duty for a week, the gerbils aren't going to be doing so well at the end of the week if I didn't remember to water them, because I didn't learn the skill. When our daughter was 4 and 5 years old, we'd sometimes say, Nora, go clean up your room, and she'd go into her room, do nothing. She didn't know how to clean up her room. We hadn't taught her the skills to do that. So the second thing is the skills to be successful in the interactions. When the mom picks up that infant and the baby goes, that's a skillful performance on the part of the infant. And when the mom says, did you see that? She cooed to me. That's reinforcement. That's number 3, recognition or reinforcement for skillful performance. When young people have opportunities for involvement, when they make a skillful performance, and when they are recognized for their performance, they begin to feel bonded to that social unit. Whether it's a school classroom and the teacher says, wow, did you see Dave fed the gerbils all week last week? And look at, they're running around in that thing. It's great. Isn't that great? Thank you, Dave, for feeding the gerbils. This week it's someone else's turn. That's recognition. And I think, I like this class. I like this teacher. I even like those gerbils. And so when we build opportunity, skills, and recognition, we create stronger bonds between families and children and schools and children. And then the fifth and final step, which is clear standards for behavior. When people feel bonded to school and their teacher says you need to do your homework, they're more likely to do it. When adolescents feel bonded to their mom and your mom says, I don't want you drinking tonight when you go out, you're more likely not to drink when you go out. So 5 simple things. I want to show you an illustration of how this works in a family, an interaction between a mom and her daughter, and I want you to just see, can you see opportunities, skills, recognition, bonding, and clear standards for behavior?
Yes. 6 orange plus 8 blue. How many is that altogether? 1. 14. You got every single one right? Are you good at math? Yeah. You are good at math. Do you like doing math? Yeah. Yes. Okay, let's do a different one.
So did you see that? That's a momentary interaction with an opportunity for involvement. That kid wasn't that good in math. She had to count all 14 up. But our mom says, you got them all right. And they slap hands and she says, are you good at math? And that girl says, yes, I am. And now she believes she is and she's going to do well in it next time. And she says, do you like doing math? Yes, I like doing math. I want to just stop for a moment and ask you to just think about what I've been saying so far. Does it make sense to you? Do you have questions that come to mind? At the end of the time, hopefully if I go as fast as I hope I can, you'll have a chance to talk about this. And do you think these ideas could be used in your own interactions with young people you care about? Just take 30 seconds and think about where we've been so far. Okay, if you're with me, would you give me a signal and say, yes, you may go on now. I'm okay so far. I can continue with you for a few more minutes. All right, thank you. Appreciate that. So what about this Seattle Social Development Project? What did we do? Well, it was a study that began in the 1st grade. We began with random assignment of all teachers in 8 elementary schools and all the 1st grade students in those schools to either be part of the Raising Healthy Children program or to be in a control condition. That was changed as a result of a number of factors when the children were entering the 5th grade. Students who were with me earlier today can explain to you why that changed. We won't take time for it tonight, but the study ultimately ended up being what's called a Quasi Experiment, in which there were 4 conditions. Children who got the intervention from grades 1 through 6, children who got it only in 5th and 6th grade, children who served as controls, went through the normal Seattle Public Schools experience, and a group of families that got only parent training only. I'm not going to talk about that group. They were socio-demographically different from the other 3 groups, and we're not going to focus on them tonight. About half of them were boys, half of them were girls. You can see the ethnic distribution of the population, and you'll see about 52% of the young people in that sample were from low-income families. So there was a lot of heterogeneity. We had mandatory busing in the Seattle Public Schools at the time. There were 3 elements that we implemented based on that model. We taught teachers better methods to manage and teach in the classroom. We offered parents classes that they could participate in improving their parenting skills. And we also, in the 1st grade, worked with children on some of the basic skills you need to be part of this classroom in order to succeed and be part of the school community or the classroom community. So I'm not going to have time to spend much time on these. I hope people in the back can read them. The first teacher training component was what we call proactive classroom management. How do you establish the rules and expectations of a school classroom so that kids aren't out of line and have to get yelled at? One example is a signal. If young people are talking and the teacher doesn't want to have to call on people and say, be quiet, the teacher can stand up with mouth closed, hands raised, and that means be quiet, face the front, and don't talk. Have your mouth closed, eyes on the instructor. How many people think they could do that in this group right here, right now? You'd probably do that if I taught it to you as a lesson, right? Okay, I'm going to pretend we did. Later on, you may get to use the skill. That's one of the examples of proactive classroom management. There's more to it than that. It was 3 days of in-service before the beginning of the school year and 2 days during the school year as the kids went through. Interactive teaching means you're teaching to an objective. You're making sure children understand why they want to learn this. It's like when a teacher in an anthropology or archaeology class, the first day of class, comes into the classroom, picks up the wastebasket, throws it on the desk and says, let's see what we can figure out about the people who were in here last class period from what they left in the garbage. That's what archaeologists do. And students say, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Let's do C. So the idea is a mental set followed by instruction. And when teachers are doing interactive teaching, they don't just call on the 3 kids in the front with their hands raised. They do choral responding. They check for understanding by asking everyone to raise their hand if they think they have it, by writing on slates, etc., so that you can check with the whole class. When 50 to 60% of the students have the material, then they put them into cooperative learning groups, heterogeneous groups mixed with regard to ethnicity, gender, and ability, in which the team is successful if each individual member of the team masters the material. And now you're harnessing peer influence in the pursuit of learning. Children are learning from each other, the second time being explained to not by the teacher doing it again, but by other students. The parenting interventions, raising healthy children, how do you observe and reinforce positive behavior in your children to reinforce it? Because we know that that will get more positive behavior. Supporting school success, many of the moms in our program, of the kids in our program, had dropped out of school, sometimes left school early because they were pregnant, they were afraid of school. They needed skills to be able to talk to their child's teacher, and play simple math and reading games with their child to help their children get off to a good start in school. And finally, the third preventive intervention, guiding good choices, for parents of children in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, how do you establish rules and expectations in the family that children will agree to and abide by and talk to about before they change their behavior if they feel that they have to start breaking those rules or doing something different. For the young people, we did a very simple program called I Can Problem Solve that the 1st grade teachers offered to the children, and in the 6th grade, we offered the kids a program in refusal skills, how to say no to your friends, keep your friends, and still have a good time. What did this produce? Well, by the time the children graduated from the 6th grade, the children in the full intervention condition, that's the green bar, compared to the kids who only got it in the 5th and 6th grade, the late intervention, and the red is the control group. And what you can see is there's a significant effect on academic achievement when you teach in more effective ways in the classroom. It shouldn't be surprising, but it's clear evidence, and there's this stair-step effect in which you see that 2 years in 5th and 6th grade is not as effective as if you begin this intervention in the 1st grade. When children enter middle school at age 13 or 14, they begin to lose interest in school. And this is what happened to commitment to school, commitment to education, bonding to school. I want to get an education. I want to graduate from high school. I might want to go on to college, etc. This is what happened to the control group during the middle school and high school years. This is what happened to the late intervention group, and this is what happened to the full intervention group. They got into middle school. They didn't have those teachers who were doing quite that same kind of teaching, and they didn't really like middle school that much. But then their commitment to education flattened out. And by the age of 16, they were significantly more bonded to school and committed to education than was the control group, and that continued to be a greater, significant difference between those groups by the age of 18. So what does that produce in terms of lifestyle changes? If you look at the control group, by age of 18, 25% of them were heavy alcohol users compared to 15% in the full intervention group. Less lifetime violence, less had repeated a grade. By age 21, you see that 91% of the kids in the full intervention group had graduated from high school compared to 81% in the control group. And you can see these differences in criminal records, etc. We didn't eliminate problems, but we were helping young people get on a different developmental trajectory by what happened in the elementary grades that was lasting through age 21. At age 24 and 27, when you compare the diagnosable mental health disorders in the full intervention group, the late group, and the control group, you see 27% of the control group at age 24 had a diagnosable mental health disorder, major depressive episode, GAD, etc. And you can see those differences at age 24 and age 27. So good teaching and good parenting having an effects on substance use, on criminal behavior, on school achievement, as well as on mental health outcomes. And finally, although we never said the S word in our program whatsoever, when we followed up young people at age 21, we found that the young females in the control group, 56% of them had already been pregnant by age 21, compared to 38% in the full intervention group. 40% had had a baby by age 21, compared to 23% in the full intervention group. And finally, we looked at sexually transmitted infections. In the control group, by the end by age 30, 38% had had an STI, sexually transmitted infection, compared to 26% in the full intervention group. But we found that this intervention has its greatest effects on those at highest risk. In the control group, fully 65% of the African American children reported that by age 30 they had had a sexually transmitted infection. In the full intervention group, that was 26% of the African American children. In the Caucasian children, 33% had had a sexually transmitted infection, compared to 27%. So among the African Americans and the whites, the range, the level of exposure to sexually transmitted infections was the same for both African Americans and whites in the full intervention group. Cost-benefit analysis done by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy says is that you double your money if you do if you do the Raising Healthy Children program that we tested in the Seattle Social Development Project. For every dollar you spend, you get at least $2 plus back in benefits to society in terms of reduced costs for criminal justice processing, for treatment of people with alcohol problems, mental health problems, etc. The summary is that when parents get those 5 ideas, opportunity, skills, recognition, bonding, and clear standards for behavior, that they can put kids on a more positive developmental path and produce better outcomes, and those effects are most prominent for the children at highest risk. Today, there are menus of tested and effective preventive interventions that you can consult and see what has been shown to be effective in reducing specific risk factors, in enhancing protective factors, and in preventing substance abuse, delinquency, unwanted teen pregnancy, and school dropout and misbehavior. That's the good news. The bad news is that we're not using this new knowledge in this country. And it's frustrating because we have really had a sea change in the knowledge base, and yet if we go into schools in many places or we go into communities, people are doing things that are either untested or things like DARE that have been tested and shown to not prevent substance abuse among young people, and yet often people are still doing these things that don't work. We think the challenge and the question is, how can we ensure that these tested and effective preventive interventions that I've been telling you about are taken to scale across states and communities? The specific task is to increase the use of tested and effective policies and programs while recognizing that communities are different from one another and don't want to be told what to do by somebody from elsewhere. Communities want to make their own decisions about what's best for our children because we know our kids best. And yet we know that different communities are different. Different communities have different profiles of risk exposure. In one community, this is a school catchment area in Seattle, Madison Middle School, you'll see that the risk factors that we looked at earlier are right across the bottom, and what you're seeing is the prevalence of exposure to those risk factors in self-report surveys among the 10th graders in the 8th graders in this middle school. 87% of them completed these questionnaires. If you go across town to another place, Nova Alternative School, you see a very different profile of risk. And that means the same program may not be appropriate for those two different contexts, which means we need to begin to think about how do we identify and address those risk factors that are most prevalent and elevated in a school or community or neighborhood with test and effective programs, and those protective factors that are low, and how do we strengthen the protective factors in that school or neighborhood given its unique profile. We developed something that's called the Communities of Care Prevention System that is trying to help communities apply these advances of prevention science that we've been talking about to their own work in preventing problems and promoting youth development. In this approach, communities identify the levels of risk and protection exposure by surveying all the 6th, 8th, 12th 10th and 12th graders in the public schools in their community. And based on the evidence that they get from those confidential anonymous surveys in which young people answer questions like, do your parents know where you are and who you're with when you're not at home? When they complete that survey, the community then is able to look at a profile of risk and protection in that community to make a decision about what risk factors do we need to really address if we want to strengthen the public health in this community. That system then chooses, tests, and effective programs to put in place, and the community installs those new programs or policies with fidelity to make sure that they'll produce the same outcomes. And every 2 years, they repeat that survey in the schools to understand, are children reporting less tobacco use? Are they reporting less alcohol use, less marijuana use, less violent acts, etc.? We think that this locally owned and operated prevention system is more likely to be sustained over years in communities because it is owned and operated by the local community. So I'm going to just skip to the bottom line and tell you that communities that care is effective. We know that it significantly reduces alcohol, tobacco, delinquent behavior, and violent behavior among young people. It was tested in a randomized controlled trial involving, as you heard earlier, 24 communities across this country. 4 of those communities are right here in Utah, and they're part of this study. And that study found, and there's been a separate study done in the state of Pennsylvania of communities that care, but the study, the randomized trial that we did, found that if you follow a group of 4,400 kids across those 24 communities forward over time, by the time they are completing the 8th grade, the kids in the CTC communities, this is the whole population now, not just a few kids who've been in a program, but the whole population of young people who were in the 5th grade and followed through to the 8th grade, 33% lower rate of tobacco initiation, 32% lower rate of alcohol initiation, 25% less likely to engage, to have started to engage in delinquent behavior compared to those kids in the control community. And what about current use of substances? Well, 23% less likely to be currently drinking in the 8th grade. They are 37% less likely to have had 5 or more drinks in a row in the 8th grade, and also have committed fewer delinquent acts currently in the 8th grade. So now I want to tell you a little bit, I guess. Oh, I thought I was going to do one other thing, but I guess I'm not. I'm going to do it later. So what's it like? What produces the outcomes? What produces the outcomes is a 5-phase process. Communities that Care begins with a get started phase, which asks, is this the right program for our community? Is this a system that we want to bring into our community? The key leaders in the community have to make this decision. The people who control resources and shape opinion in that community have to be the ones who bring communities that care in, because ultimately they're going to have to change the allocation of service and educational resources if new programs are needed in that community. If the police chief and the school superintendent of a city won't ride together to learn about communities that care in the same car, it's not the right program. You have to have a system in which people are willing to collaborate for the well-being of children before communities that care is the right system for you. In a neighborhood where the parents and the adults in that neighborhood are afraid of the child welfare system because they think it just takes their kids away, and they're afraid of the juvenile justice system because they think that it's going to lock their kids up, we need to do some things to make sure that law enforcement and residents agree that their goal is crime prevention and working together towards that goal. But if the community and the leaders of the community say this is the right system for us, we want to use communities that care in our community, then they go into phase 2, which is get organized. They create a coalition or identify an existing coalition of stakeholders from all the diverse groups that are in the community. If you look at the list of people here, you're seeing the people who are on the Communities that Care prevention boards in the 12 experimental communities in the trial that we did, and you can see the diversity of people represented in these different community coalitions. We want all the stakeholders from all the groups, and they learn about risk and protective factors just as you have tonight, but in a little bit more intensely and in a little bit greater depth. And then they learn about using the Communities that Care system to develop a profile. They do those surveys in the schools, and they get these data that come back to them. And these are the outcome data that came from a school in Seattle, Nova Alternative School. And what you see in these data, if I can get this to work, look at this. drunk or high at school in the last year. This is self-report data of the 10th graders at Nova Alternative School. 52% of the kids in that alternative school say they've been drunk or high at school in the last year. This is not good. Even the coalition that included students said, maybe this isn't good. What you're looking at in comparison on these diamonds is the level of that outcome in monitoring the future, a national survey conducted by Lloyd Johnston and colleagues at the University of Michigan. And in the same year, you're looking at the prevalence of these problem behaviors in the nation compared with our school. And you can see that this school has much higher rates of drug use than most schools in the United States. And that was a concern to the coalition that was planning for prevention activities in this school. This is an alternative school, and when you look at the protective factors or the promotive factors, this is very interesting. This is school opportunities for pro-social involvement. When you survey the kids at Nova Alternative School, almost 100% of them say, this is a place of opportunity. It's a place where I get to work on projects I want to work on, where there are chances for kids like me to learn. And it's also a place of recognition and reinforcement. Similar numbers of young people, almost 100%, are saying, yes, they recognize and reinforce me for my effort here, for my improvement, for doing better, for trying to do well academically in school. And yet, when you look here at social skills, especially refusal skills, do I have the skills to say no to a friend if they're saying, let's go out behind school and smoke a marijuana joint or something? Not so well in the social skills area. When you look at the risk factors, you'll see that in this alternative school, when they did the baseline survey, about 85% of young people expressed favorable attitudes towards drug use. That's the profile of that school community. And armed with that profile, the community coalition then moved on to the next phase, which is to create a plan. And what they did there was they went to the Prevention Strategies Guide in Communities at Care. I'll show you how you can get access to this later. And there they went down to their risk factor, which is favorable attitudes towards the problem behavior, favorable attitudes towards substance use in this school's case. And they said, what's been shown to be effective as a program in reducing that risk factor? And they see that classroom curricula for social competence promotion has been effective in reducing that risk factor. And so they look at the menu that's available in the Communities at Care Prevention Strategies Guide, and they saw a number of programs, actually more than this. These are just illustrations. But one they saw was a program that's called Project Toward No Drug Abuse. And it was developed and tested in alternative schools in Los Angeles. They said, let's look at that one. We're an alternative school, maybe this one would work for us. It had shown to reduce alcohol problems as well as violent behavior among alternative school students in Los Angeles. And they looked at this program, and that's the program they chose to put in place at Nova Alternative School. They then implement the program and evaluate the program. Those are the 5 phases of Communities at Care. It takes some training to get to the point where you can do this as a coalition with proficiency. There are 6 trainings that are provided over the course of a year to get people up to speed on Communities at Care. The timeline for Communities at Care, you can see that there's assessment of risk and protection in the first 6 to 9 months. Then you're choosing those test and effective programs that you want to put in place, and by about a year, you're starting to implement new programs. We expect that in 2 to 5 years, you'll actually see a decrease in prioritized risk factors and an increase in protective factors community-wide, and by 4 to 10 years, you should be able to see actually significant decreases community-wide in problems like substance abuse, delinquency, violence, etc. in the community. So now I'd like you to just talk to the person next to you just for a few moments and answer these questions. What questions come to mind? Do you think this could work in communities that you know? And could it produce better outcomes for children community-wide? Just take a minute and reflect on what we've been talking about, if you will. Oh, you're fast learners. If only first graders were as fast as learners when you do it such a little lesson. Thank you very much. So we're going to go on, but hopefully you're formulating your questions because we're going to get the chance to talk and discuss, and I'll stop yelling at you in just a moment. We did this trial. People said you can't randomly assign communities to an experimental or control condition, but we got letters from the mayor, police chief, and school superintendent of 24 communities across America, and we randomly assigned them to either be in the experimental or control condition. Control condition means Data collection is going to happen. You'll get data back from the project, but we're not going to provide you training in communities that care. And people were willing to do that, and as I said, 4 of the communities in the study are right here in the state of Utah, and the results that you're going to see are including Utah state results. It was a randomized trial, randomized at the community level, 24 towns, randomly assigned, matched within the state, and then randomly assigned to condition. We started following this panel of students when they were in 5th grade. We've actually now surveyed them through the 12th grade, and we're surveying them actually now in the year after they finish high school if they graduate on time. As I mentioned, they participated in the CTC communities in these 6 trainings. They did the assessment by the surveys and then collected the survey data, and then they prioritized which risk factors they wanted to address, and they implemented tested and effective prevention programs from this menu that I showed you earlier, usually about 3 programs, new programs in each community. They chose those programs from a restricted menu in Communities of Care. Communities of Care menu includes programs from the prenatal period all the way through age 21. They're very primary or universal preventive interventions to indicated prevention interventions for children who are already starting to manifest problems. But for this test, because we had 5 years of NIH funding to do it, we limited the menu to only programs that were affecting children, families, and schools between the grades of 5 and 9. So that's the nature of the interventions that they could choose. And these are the interventions that were chosen in the communities. The first year of intervention was 2004, 2005 when they were implementing programs, and you can see the second and third year of intervention. The yellow programs are school programs, programs implemented in schools. The red programs are after-school programs, often put in place for children who are having difficulty or come from greater risk backgrounds, parent, family, etc. And the blue ones, the turquoise ones, are family-focused programs, parent and family-focused prevention interventions. One of the things I would say is that all these programs have been tested in well-controlled trials and showed positive effects on producing better outcomes and reducing risk or enhancing protection, so that they were choosing programs from a menu of programs that have been shown to work. One of the interesting things that we learned from this study was that at first, 6 of those school districts that were in the study said, we can't put new prevention programs in our school. We've got No Child Left Behind. Don't you know about No Child Left Behind? We've got to focus on math and reading, and we don't have time for substance abuse prevention or all these other touchy-feely things. But there was a coalition in those cities of people who cared about the well-being of young people. And they said, you know, if young people are smoking marijuana before they come to school, they don't do so well on the math tests. And that's a barrier to learning, and we need to address the barriers to learning as well as the skills of math if we want children to learn math. If 65% of the kids in a school community, of the middle schoolers say, my parents don't know where I am and who I'm with when I'm not at home, we need to think about making sure parents have the skills to be effective and successful in their parenting. And what we saw was that as the communities were able to, the coalitions were able to keep thinking with the schools about what we really need to promote the success of our children, by the third year, all 12 of those CTC communities were doing programs in the schools. And what that did was saturate those communities with test and effective preventive interventions. There are about 10,000 children, eligible children, across those 12 experimental communities. In the first year of intervention, you'll see about 1,400 of them were getting exposed to a test and effective preventive curriculum. But by the third year of intervention, over 5,000 of them, over half of the young people, were now being exposed to an effective preventive intervention in the schools. We weren't so concerned about the numbers here, because these programs are for children who are falling behind and need a selective preventive intervention. It might be tutoring, it might be big brothers, big sisters mentoring from kids from single parent families, etc. So we knew that that would be smaller numbers. The disappointment to us was we wanted to see these numbers of families participate in parenting training, and we weren't successful with all kinds of strategies for recruitment. We need to do better to encourage parents to go beyond going to the birthing classes and learn how to do the pawing, to say every transition, there's a time when we can learn some skills that will help our child make that transition more successfully to successful adulthood. They targeted 2 to 5 risk factors in each community. You can see the communities, they're listed 1 through 12 across there, and you can see the risk factors that each community prioritized. If you see an X there, it means that community prioritized those risk factors. So different combinations of risk factors in different communities to address their unique profile of risk as they saw it in the student surveys. And what do we see in terms of the effects of that on risk? Well, the first thing you notice is that the controls in red and the blues, the communities, the care communities in blue, everybody's going up in risk exposure during the middle school years. Between the grades of 5 and 9, more kids develop favorable attitudes towards drug use. They have more friends who use drugs. Parents are becoming often more laissez-faire and less and more permissive. So you see an increase in risk, but the slope of that line is significantly greater in the control communities than in the CTC communities. And by the 10th grade, there's a significantly lower overall risk exposure of those targeted risk factors in the CTC than in the control communities. What that produces, I mentioned to you earlier, a 33% reduction in the initiation of cigarette smoking by the end of the 8th grade. 12% of the kids in the control community started smoking in the 8th grade compared to 8% of the kids who hadn't started smoking before in the CTC communities. Fully 25% of the children in the 8th grade in control communities in this study started drinking in the 8th grade if they hadn't started before that, compared to 17% in the CTC communities, and you can see the effect on delinquent behavior as well. So significant reductions in initiation as well as in the current involvement in these behaviors. So 21% current alcohol users in the control communities in the 8th grade compared to 16% in the CTC communities. Almost 1 out of every 10 kids in the 8th grade in the control communities in this study reported they had had 5 or more drinks in a row in the last 2 weeks. Not acceptable. That number was down to 5.7% in the full intervention CTC communities. And again, a significant reduction in delinquent behavior. What about the long-term effects? I'm happy to tell you that I'm presenting tonight the results that were just published on Monday of this week in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. These results show that 1 year after we stopped working with these communities, they were still doing communities of care. If they wanted to continue to do it, we wanted them to continue to do it. But the question is, does this produce sustainable results after the researchers are out not helping the communities anymore implement the intervention? And I'll just show you 4 quick illustrations of what the sustained effect of CTC. The proportion who ever smoked, 52% in the control group compared to 44% in the experimental group, and the adjusted odds ratio, that's what that AOR it means, it's about half. What it means is that in the 10th grade, the likelihood of smoking was about half in the CTC communities what it was in the control communities, a reduction of 0.54 in the odds of starting to smoke in the 10th grade if you were in a CTC community. Significant reduction also, 3/4 of the kids who had ever had alcohol by the end of the 10th grade compared to 2/3 in the CTC communities. And again, the odds of starting to drink in the 10th grade significantly reduced, 0.62 compared to the control group. And also delinquency in the past year significantly reduced again, as well as violence in the past year significantly reduced again. So we're seeing enduring effects of communities of care beyond the time of the intervention when communities are now doing the work themselves without assistance from our group. We've had the opportunity using the Washington State Institute for Public Policy methods to look at the costs and benefits of communities of care. It's not inexpensive. On average, the most conservative estimate we have for communities of care is about $1,100 per child in a community that's doing communities that care. But when you look at the benefits, you see that for every $1,000 you put in, you get massive returns in terms of reductions in juvenile justice court processing costs, in costs to victims of crime, as well as morbidity and mortality costs associated with smoking. So that The cost of communities of care about $1,100 per child, and yet the benefits are over $5,800 per child, or a net benefit of $4,780 per child, which means that you're getting about $5.30 back for every dollar you invest in communities of care. And this is the most conservative estimate because it doesn't even include the alcohol benefits yet. So we are pretty convinced now that communities of care can make a big difference in people's lives. If you're interested in communities of care, that first website has all the training materials, all the PowerPoints, everything a community needs in terms of the content to implement communities of care. If you wanted to see it in action, you can go to this second website and you'll actually get to see a community that's doing communities of care. One of the really exciting things to me is that communities of care is spreading right here in the state of Utah. There are communities across the state that have learned to do communities of care and are currently either beginning to implement or fully implementing the communities of care system. And that's really a wonderful thing, and it's a testimony to this gentleman, Craig Povey, from the Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health in the State Department of Health Services here, Health and Human Services here. And if you're interested in communities of care and you want to know how can my community get involved, Craig Povey has done a wonderful thing. He said, for any community who wants to get involved in communities of care, for every dollar you put up, I'll put up $1 from the state, and we'll match it dollar for dollar to get communities of care started, to hire a community coordinator to do communities of care in our state. So if you're interested in learning more about it in Utah, Craig Povey's your man. If you're interested in learning more about communities of care generally or how to implement it, etc., Blair Brook-Weiss from our group is the communities of care specialist in our group. And with that, I'll stop lecturing you and ask you for your thoughts.
We have a little gift here for Dr. Hawkins. It's a clock for him to remember his time here at BYU. It says the Marjorie Pay Hinckley Lecturer 2012, J. David Hawkins. We wanted to present that to you and say thank you. Good job.
This was here the whole time, and I thought it just meant your time is up. Thank you. Thank you very much.